What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale, coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are proud, as always, to bring you the #1 podcast in the universe now. The charts have expanded to include the entire universe, and we are at the top of them. We are here to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff, mostly playoffs related, some news items that we have not caught up on. So we're excited to talk Mavs, Timberwolves. We're excited to talk about the future of the Pacers. Give you a little check on what's going on with the Celtics, who somehow are underachieving, even though they only lost 2 games during the Eastern Conference playoffs. So we might want to talk about that a little bit. First and foremost, though, Mr. Hughes, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm sweaty, though. I have a sweaty head right now, and it's not even that hot. I don't know. Maybe I'm just nervous because we're recording at a time we haven't recorded at for a long time.
I'm not used to it being dark anymore when we record.
Other than that, I'm good. I'm excited to discuss. We have like would you call it a grab bag or like a potpourri of
this is like it feels like the most all over the place the podcast will have been in quite. We've had like these very central topics lately, and this is not going to be that.
That's okay. We move through topics really quickly and don't linger too long on stuff when we discuss it.
We're very quick.
I see no issues arising at all.
Yeah. So where do we want to start? Should we start with, you want to start with Mavs, Wolves, since that game, this is releasing on a Thursday and game 5 will be on a Thursday. There is a game 5, which I'm super excited about because I felt like, I know we had some good series, but like even Nuggets Wolves went to 7 and that series kind of sucked. Just when you look at like how many blowouts there were. And yes, we had like Knicks Sixers and every Knicks series was basically stressful, but even Pacers Celtics, it was most of those games, I would say at least 3 of the 4 were highly entertaining. Even the 2 that Tyrese Haliburton did not play in. And the Wolves Mavericks specifically has been so close in every single game that you could, first of all, you could easily envision that the Wolves are the team that's up 3-1 right now. And so this is not scientific analysis at all, but I was very excited that we got a game 5.
Yeah. I mean, what's the stat? Like the Wolves in the first 3 games, all of which they lost, were ahead in the last 5 minutes, basically. So like, I mean, yeah, these are losses. I think some of this analysis extends to the Celtics to where it's like, we're somehow upset. Not we, but people are somehow upset that are like, I don't know about the Celtics still, because like some of these games were close. It's like, okay, what do you want them to do? With the Wolves, it's kind of the opposite, where it's like, oh, these games are close, but up until game 4, it was like they're getting swept. Like that's all anyone's going to remember. So I'm excited too. I just think like almost no matter what happens, it's just going to be like you get all these like, well, it's a referendum on where Anthony Edwards is in this whole face of the league, like star trajectory thing. And it's a referendum on like, can Luka Doncic and a defense, like, is that enough for a finals berth? Like, yeah, it turns out it's going to be more than likely, but I think we're going to get interesting angles almost no matter what. I wanted to ask you though, has this series, so we haven't really talked about this series at all, Wolves Mavs. So you come out of the Denver Minnesota series thinking like, Jesus Christ, like Minnesota is just built for it. Like they won't meet a bigger challenge. Turns out matchups matter in the playoffs. Has anything in this series like changed your opinion about Minnesota, or do you have an explanation for why like the Wolves looked for long stretches so good against Jokic and the Nuggets, but have just had fewer and fewer answers for Doncic, and a Mavs team that you would think on paper like has more players you can leave alone as a defense like than Denver did? That's been one of my biggest things, is trying to figure out like, what is it about Dallas that's causing problems for Minnesota that Denver couldn't cause,
I think the big one is the Minnesota Timberwolves were very clearly built to disrupt the Denver Nuggets, which is not to say they're not built to beat anyone else. We watched them beat someone else already.
But sorry, just because of like their size with respect to Jokic in particular, or like, what do you mean when you say they're built? Because obviously they did beat them, and it worked. But like, what do you mean when you say that?
So when you're looking at the way that Dallas specifically is going to run their offense, when you've gone from, well, Jamal Murray was injured, but you have the one guy who's going to create from kind of this outside in perspective. Now going to that where you have 2, and I mean, when Jaden Hardy is playing, you have 3.
Can I tell you how glad I am I never sold my Jaden Hardy stock?
Right. So there's there's that element to me, but I also think that we're kind of seeing like what we always knew about their offense to where it's, oh, you do need the more shooting or the more tried and true second option. And I'm not saying the Nuggets weren't built to exploit that, but it just wasn't an issue in that Nuggets series because I do think, and I don't really know if this is how accurate or correct this is, but you were able to stay with your base defense against Denver. And so that's also what I mean when you're looking at you're built to beat the Nuggets is that you are basically, you move some things around, but in this series, think about the things that we've seen where it's, okay, you have Rudy Gobert coming up to the level. No, you have him dropping back, but now you have him dropping back, but you're also sending help. Oh, Anthony Edwards is going to be on the ball. No, let's try and use him away from the ball to try and conserve energy. Anthony Edwards is not a great off-ball defender. He's always been best on ball, so that doesn't work. So are we necessarily going to flip-flop where game 4, we saw a lot of, oh, we're going to put Jaden McDaniels on Kyrie, and then that makes Kyrie's life more difficult. And then with Luka, we're going to see a lot of Kyle Anderson going up against him. And so the fact that you've seen so many changes, I don't know. I guess when you look at Dallas specifically, why are they better built to stress test Minnesota's defense? I think it does come back to my initial claim, which was that you have these two outside-in creators that you need to account for. And just not that Luka Doncic is better than Nikola Jokic, but the way that, like, and they kind of play at similar cadences. Like Luka, that's why, first of all, that's why Kyle Anderson works against Luka Doncic.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, when you dig into the data on possessions in which Kyle Anderson registers as a partial defender on Luka Doncic, the Mavs are averaging under a point per possession as a team in those situations. That is incredible. But part of the reason you're able to have Kyle Anderson on him is because he doesn't try and blow by you. And, but also the speed at which he's able to like process things. And so it's always going to maintain his dribble. He's going to just exploit you from the in-between if you give him any sort of space. So it feels like it's been way more of a defensive chess match for Minnesota specifically of trying to find things that work. And then I do think there's a level of, not that, I think if anyone thinks that Dallas is just so much better than Minnesota, I think you veer a little bit away from reality there because you mentioned at the top where these games have been so close. I think Minnesota's held double-digit leads in 3 of the 4 games, if not all 4 of them. I can't remember off the cuff there. This is more like if you have Karl-Anthony Towns playing a little better, and I know that Dallas has done good things against Anthony Edwards defensively, but what if one of the shifts we kind of saw in game 4 was like, oh, they're going to set more double screens or the higher screens for Anthony Edwards so that gives him more runway to work with. If they'd made that shift sooner, is that going to help their offense a little bit more? So I think that's also part of it where not bad luck, but just Minnesota's not operating at its offensive peak, which credit to Dallas for doing that. But this is not all Dallas infused when you start digging into the types of looks that we've seen Nickeil Alexander-Walker miss or Karl-Anthony Towns specifically miss.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I think a couple other things that I've kind of taken away are and you kind of, I guess you basically said it, but it's like, you know, Jokic is great, Luka is great, but Dallas has the second guy. Dallas has Kyrie Irving. And like, I think, I don't know, at some point I just need to say like, I've been wrong about almost everything about Dallas, like in terms of their moves over the last couple of years. And like, I still think like at the time it was totally reasonable to like have very little trust in the Kyrie Irving thing working out. But like part of the reason Dallas is giving Minnesota more problems is that Kyrie Irving is just way better than Jamal Murray. And like, yeah, this is coming off of a 6 for 18 effort, you know, and
Right.
like even those games, you can just see that what he can do against like a second side or just as the initial like primary initiator is just like, I mean, I don't know, like, do we even need to like laud his, like, I don't know, unprecedented offensive skill? Like he's just the things that he can do with the basketball, like his hands, his touch, the shots that he attempts and makes are out of nothing, are just like nobody else does what he can do. And Jamal Murray certainly could not against Minnesota. So like, that's a big part of it. And it's kind of a, I don't know, reinforcement of this idea we've had about Jamal Murray lately of like, I mean, like, is he really a number 2? Like, or is it just he's the second best guy and he happens to play with Jokic? I mean, the way Irving has outperformed him, granted Murray was hurt, is kind of eye-opening to me. I think the other thing that I've tried to like avoid just making this be my takeaway, but I think it is pretty basic, is just that like the flaws that Minnesota had all year that I mentioned in every series, I kept picking them to lose in the playoffs, was that like when you get down to it, their offensive execution is kind of just not there. And Edwards isn't quite there as like there's no solution for this guy, like Doncic level finisher. And like, that's what we've seen late, the turnovers, the like rushing into bad shots by Minnesota, Edwards being like also just being exhausted for some of the games. Like that's another part of it, but Minnesota is not there offensively, and Edwards is not quite there yet either. And it's a grossly unfair standard to hold him to. Like, you aren't as good at closing as Luka Doncic. Well, like, okay. I mean, he's multiple years behind him developmentally, and like maybe nobody is. So, but have you felt that way too? Of like, when it comes down to it, Minnesota's offensive execution, to me, this just feels like the story of the series, really, in terms of like what I'll remember, just hasn't been as good as it needs to be. And that's not a massive surprise to me.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I just don't know how much there's the whole, yes, Anthony Edwards has needed to play better, and in game 4, he did. But even when you start digging into the turnovers and stuff, Minnesota has the lower turnover rate in this series than Dallas right now.
They just seem to come at the wrong times.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
There's definitely, he's not Anthony Edwards. They sometimes have to run the offense like he's prime James Harden. Like, that's the level of control he needs to have. And he's not there. That's not an insult. He's 22.
Right.
And but I just don't know how much responsibility necessary to lay at his feet when it feels more like an intrinsic limitation of their current roster construction. And I'm more inclined to like not blame, but like the bigger concern to me is Karl-Anthony Towns not really who had like the most Karl-Anthony Towns game ever in game 4, just running the gamut of every good, bad, awesome, chaotic, fouls out, of course, too. So just like, but hit some like mega shots like down the stretch. And to not have, like, he is supposed to be, they made the bet, and I would have said, I still think he's good enough to do it at his peak. Does he sustain it long enough? But like, not having that just second bankable outlet, and it's made life tougher on Edwards, because Dallas is okay. Yeah, when you look at this series and the amount of threes that Minnesota, like, they're shooting 44% on wide open threes, and Dallas still just doesn't really care. And Dallas does a good job contesting threes. I want to make that clear too. But like, Dallas, the fact that they're 3-1 in this series, they're shooting 32% on wide open threes. And so it does show that there's just like this, I would say, a lack of flexibility to the way that the Wolves are able to run their offense, and where Dallas doesn't have those same limitations, which, by the way, is kind of like a feather under Luka's cap, because how long has he talked about in the same breath as James Harden or Trae Young, where it's like, you have to play one way with these guys. And it's no, like, the Mavs have played faster this year. And then a thing that at least it seemed like was featuring more prominently that over the course of this series is they're able to keep Rudy Gobert out of, I'll put that in quotes if anyone's watching, the primary actions, because it makes it look like Dereck Lively's better at doing this than Daniel Gafford, but it's going to make it look like he's coming up to set the screen, but it's, oh no, like that was Josh Green or that was Derrick Jones Jr. is going to set the screen. Dereck Lively's going to slip or, fan out. And being able to just even run your offense that way, where it's like, we don't have to have the same person kind of, where it's Minnesota, it's the same one or two guys. It feels like they're always kind of screening, and they're not able to keep the same level of, or generate the same level of separation for Anthony Edwards at times. So yes, Anthony Edwards could be better, but there just feels like there's functional limitations that, and now I guess I'm just parroting what you said in different words, that we always just knew about with this team. And it's something, even if they make it to the finals, or if they win the championship or make NBA history, which, by the way, I'm not calling them a team of destiny, but just like the season they've had with everything that's kind of going on with the battle for ownership, they've never been to the finals before. They've had just what feels like decades of futility at this point. Like, it wouldn't shock. And now that they get to go, it's always just, can you force the game 6? You've avoided the sweep. Now you get to go home. Can they make history? Is like a conversation we had if they force, a game 6. So this team is absolutely talented. They're on the cusp of being of greatness. But it does feel like there's something semi-substantial missing from their offensive malleability.
Yeah, and like it might just be Edwards developing more craft, like as he, in the next year or two.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but is there a solve for defenses literally don't care about anyone else in the half court?
That is ultimately the problem, and that's going to require. Well, it's just, so does that just mean that like the trade-off you have to live with forever with Rudy Gobert is like, this is kind of what might happen to your offense. You're going to get it back on the other end. But like that may just be because it, like, Towns is not part of the problem. Like, you have to account for Towns. Conley you have to account for, at least as a spot up shooter or a second side guy, since if Edwards is going to be on the ball. McDaniels, I guess, maybe is someone you still leave, but like Dallas has multiple guys on the floor all the time that get left. And like, they've survived just fine offensively. So I don't know who you lay it, like whose feet do you lay it at? If not, well, Edwards just needs to be more than someone who, I guess I put it this way. Like, one of the things that makes Minnesota and Edwards great is they can physically overwhelm you. Like, just whether that's with size or athleticism or just force. Mm-hmm. And that isn't as useful in situations where Edwards constantly finds himself like trying to create a shot against a defense that's like built to stop him and geared towards stopping him, where you need to just have more reps and develop more savvy and be craftier and not rely on tough pull-ups or straight line drives, which is kind of where he gets his buckets. So it's easy. Maybe it's probably not fair, but like the first thing to me, when you ask like, how does Minnesota improve this deficiency? I think I just start with Edwards, and like, he needs a couple more layers. But certainly you're right that like it is, the roster is just is what it is. And the guys they have on the floor when they're coming up, short in these clutch, end of the last 5 minutes of games are not like, certainly not optimal, running mates for Edwards to like really shine offensively. But I don't know how you divvy up the credit.
I think the way you did it is fair, is that if you're planning on winning with this exact group, it's the Anthony Edwards continued offensive expansion and improvement
which I think will happen, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I'd be surprised if he didn't get significantly better at exactly the stuff we're talking about.
Right. But I think, and I don't lay it at the feet not at all, but like, they've been better offensively with Rudy Gobert on the court this series. I'm just the Rudy Gobert, not assigning this to you, the Rudy Gobert discourse after all these years and all this information we have, like, can't it just fucking like, not even just change, but just be rooted in any sort of reality? It just, we're incapable, but not but like, we're just incapable of doing it, apparently. Yeah. I honestly think, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to dump on him, and I don't know if you actually saw, I'm all for like snark and memes, but did you see the Karl-Anthony Towns piece at SB Nation the other day?
So I saw it referenced and then I sought it out. This is like weird territory for us, because we've probably had to write stuff, 10 years ago that like we wish we hadn't. And it's probably, but like that was just, I think Zach Harper said like, he didn't link to it in the Athletics, daily email, because he's like, because it's poorly done and like something else. And then I read it and I was like, yeah, this was like, what is this?
And I normally don't, just because I know how the sausage is made. Right. Like, I'm not going to call out another company, but what did it for me is that it was just it was done in poor taste. And the thing that stands out the most, because I did read it, and it was, even if you found parts funny, if you're ever, I don't care how old you are, how long you've been doing this, how much you want, or like, if you're trying to make a name for yourself, or if you really feel passionate about it, if one of your justifications was, yeah, sure, he lost family to COVID, but he still sucks. Like, if that's like the nutshell, like, that part was the thing that rubbed me the worst, where it's, everyone's had trauma in their lives, and we don't need to, they don't need to be inoculated against any sort of criticism or snark because of it. But to use it as part of just just that transition, among many other things, rubbed me the road. That was just terrible. So I'm not trying to dump on Karl-Anthony Towns here. I just feel like the issue is, even if you don't want to say it's Karl-Anthony Towns, is the second best offensive player on the Minnesota Timberwolves is too debatable at this point, because it needs, Karl-Anthony Towns is by far the second most important. Maybe it's Mike Conley, second most important offense. You could argue that. That's an issue in itself. And that's where I come back to, is if things go wrong, if they're looking at offseason introspection, which they're not there yet. We're so far away, and they've earned, maybe they could just make a move on the margins. But like the Karl-Anthony Towns stuff, the inconsistency, the stupid fouls, just like the roller coaster ride he gives you on offense, is like, you need that to be more steadying.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And like, well, you said it was like game 4 was the quintessential Cat game. Cause like he kind of won him the game with like 10 in the third, 10 in the fourth, hit 4 threes in the second half, I think, or whatever it was. And they needed, every three was like, oh my God, they needed that one. Like every one he hit was just, felt like just breathed life into like a corpse of a team at that. Cause they were, they lose that game, you're done. And then the 30 minutes, or was it 30 minutes he played? Cause he And like,
I will say,
at least
there
3
was
of those
maybe
fouls
one
were just
foul.
asinine fouls. Like some of
Yeah.
those were so stupid. Like, you know,
There was maybe one foul that it was, oh, are they really like that needed to be called? The other, at least 5 of them were just like, dude,
indefensible. Like you just like you cannot do that. And like that is priced in. Like that is part of the whole deal with him. Yet I mean, this is a very different series if he shoots like normally, right? Like just like not because he was just abjectly terrible through the first 3 games. It's just like
3.5 games, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, 3.5 games. And like, look what happens when he shoots well. They actually win, and it only takes one half of good play. Yeah, but like, I don't feel like I think. Again, this is unfair to Edwards just because, like, I guess, ironically, because we all like believe in how great he's going to be. It's like I don't think Towns is really going to change. You know, like it's like, well, so it just has to be Edwards. Like he has to get better. I feel that's unfair, but that's just like what I keep circling back to.
And meanwhile, there's the other end of the spectrum. This is a good place to wrap up. Is I think we've done our mea culpas on the Mavericks a number of times. I will continue to do them. And people are already recycling some of my tweets and takes about the Kyrie Irving trade. I was wrong about like the basketball impact all these trades were going to have. I was clearly wrong about, I'll admit it, but I don't regret them in the moment because I believed them. It wasn't done for engagement. It's because I thought I wouldn't have made the PJ Washington trade. I wouldn't have made the Daniel Gafford trade. I didn't think Kyrie Irving was worth the off-court risk for what he brought to on the court. I was apparently wrong on all of the, I didn't think Derrick Jones Jr. was going to be the best minimum signing in NBA history. Right. So it's just like this team but I will say what's impressive is to be that wrong on so many consecutive moves and decisions from the same team. Like that's a skill to just be that incorrect. And this team in so many ways came out of, no one was picking them like pre-deadline, post-trade deadlines. I mean, Mavs fans, I'm not discrediting you, but there were people it's like, no, they're going to be the best team in the West now. You ended up being right, but it's just like, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt based off everything we've just seen up until this point.
And can I say, when a partisan fan or fan base, I guess, is like, I told you, I knew it, you were wrong. It's like, I want receipts for the last 10 years when you also said, my team's going all the way. Like, I believe they're going to be so great. And they finished like under 500 in 8 of those years. It's like saying they're great every year doesn't make it like you're some like ace prognosticator the one time you're correct.
Right.
So it's like, I feel like I run into that all the time where it's like some rando is just on Twitter or whatever is like, doubters or we're talking about doubters and people that didn't believe. And it's like, well, you believed in a shit team forever and continued to do it. I didn't. And then was wrong this one time. It's just like, come on, like what you're not it's not just bias. It's like, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense, but
they were right in this case though. So yeah. This team is just, I can't say enough good things. And there are obviously, you can point to potential flaws or things you're worried about. But the one that stands out to me right now in this series is just, okay, well, what's going on with Dereck Lively and the next brain? Because they are just not, they found out, we already knew it, but they needed to find out again. This can't be a Dwight Powell series. No series is a Dwight Powell series. I thought Kleber looked okay, like having just come back after missing all that time. And he didn't, I would have liked to see him been more aggressive on offense, but I don't know if that's a lingering thing of it. Like, what is the shooting motion? Like, how does that feel for him right now? If they don't have him, because Minnesota's defense, I think they were able to operate the way they were in that game, in part because like the threat of Dereck Lively is the multiple dribble decision-making, or being like, if you watch this guy, not talking to you again specifically, but let's just assume that when I'm speaking generalities, I'm not saying you don't do this because I know you don't think that, just in case anyone thinks there's discord being sown behind the scenes here, not to be confused with our Discord, which you should join. The link is in the podcast and YouTube description.
Look at you.
But like when you watch Dereck Lively catch the ball and he's like able to survey the entire floor in a millisecond, like 360-degree view, basically. And then is he passing? No. Is he deciding to run towards it? Does he need to take a dribble? Not having that element in your offense, then also not having the option of just, we could bring him up to the level and we don't care. Like, oh, Karl-Anthony Towns tried to beat him off the dribble. Look, he just busted up that play from behind. Anyway, that is something where if he's not ready to go in game 5, and maybe we'll have news by the time this releases that he is, that's when I start to get a little like, that's the thing I'm looking at laser focused on for Dallas in this series is, well, do they need, like they need Dereck Lively to ensure that they can kind of close it out. It wouldn't shock me if they won game 5 without him, but I think if he's ready to go, And I'm shocked that he's not in the concussion protocol, to be honest. But I guess he was holding the back of his neck, whatever. But like not having him would be, if you're trying to say what's the biggest reason that like Minnesota could force a game 6 or that this could be the brink of NBA history, it's this team needs Dereck Lively, and he's a rookie.
I was gonna say, like, what a place to be. Like, who would like a rookie center who doesn't like still, by the way, does not play like a ton of minutes, seems integral to a team is getting out of the conference finals. Like that's just crazy.
I do sort of wonder, and I don't want to frame it this way, but we saw Chet kind of peter out by the time that the Thunder exited the playoffs. I'm wondering if Lively at all benefited from, okay, yes, he played basketball last year, Chet didn't. And like now Chet went from playing 0 games to like 90 almost, or whatever it is.
More than he's ever played by a factor of like 2.5 probably.
And then like Dereck Lively's role was always a little bit smaller than Holmgren's, but he has those midseason absences due to injury. And then also you get Daniel Gafford, and so the minutes are kind of split that way. And did that at all help him like stay fresh to the playoffs? I don't really care how much it matters, because he fucking matters a great deal to this team. And it's incredible to say that about a team that has championship aspirations, because they're one win away from being in the finals, that a rookie feels like their third most important player behind Kyrie and Luka. Like it's just, I almost can't, if I wasn't watching it, I don't think I'd be able to wrap my head around it.
It is a wild development, but like it was clear. It was very clear in this series, but it's been clear for like throughout this playoff run, like how much that guy matters. I mean, you know, what's going to be really interesting to track going forward is like, you remember how, for a minute, it would always be like, well, you know, the Spurs, got this Kawhi guy, but the Pacers got George Hill out of it. So that, that trade's like yet to be decided until it was very decided. Like the Cason Wallace, Dereck Lively thing is going to be really interesting to compare as those two guys develop, since they basically were traded. Either team could have had the other guy, and they wanted, the ones they got.
Well, I think Cason Wallace will end up being, I don't know if it'll be as impactful, especially when you look at the way the Thunder are built right now, but I don't feel, if I'm the Thunder, I still don't feel terrible.
No, nobody should. I think that it's like a weird win-win, but it is also interesting to imagine, like, what's Dereck Lively look like on the Thunder?
Well, I got asked this question on a podcast I was just on, if Dereck Lively is the ideal or the perfect non-star big man, like the mold that you want your big man to be if they're not going to be Nikola Jokic, if they're not going to be Joel Embiid, so on and so forth. So is he the perfect non-star big man?
Pretty close. If you're going to quibble, you'd want some shooting, but like
exactly
then he's a star, I guess. Like, so I don't
it's
know.
Like, well, then you have maybe Nikola Jokic. Like,
right. Yeah. So I get, that's like a perfect question, because if you start to like push back against the hypothetical, you lose, because like, well, you can't say, oh, I wish he did this, because then he's not the player you're talking about.
I will say, so like we saw he has a little bit of the, like he in the regular season made some hook shots, was able to make some nice finishes on layups, and we've seen those efficiencies drop off in the postseason. So there are still questions there, but like you're looking at this dude and how much he and what he's doing, and someone who knows how to, he's versatile, but still plays in his role, and he doesn't seem like someone that, we need to get him like 4 post touches a night just to make sure that he doesn't grow discontent. That's a big deal too.
And I think specifically for this team, like you mentioned it earlier, like his processing on the catch on like a short roll or like, it's just like, because guess what? You're going to see a lot of that if you play with Luka. Like you're going to be the outlet when 2 guys go to him off high screen action. And like, I don't really remember the last I don't forget non-star. I don't remember the last rookie big guy that could, like you said, on the catch, at like on the move, like read the floor instantly, and you hit the guy in the corner, or like throw a touch pass somewhere else, or like that on this team is just like beyond ideal. Like, and that's an absolute, like you have that or you don't, I think, kind of feel thing. Like, I don't know how you would teach someone to do what he does intuitively in that specific situation. And like, it's just like, it's a cheat code.
The off-ball spatial awareness, to where it's, so even if he's not setting the screen, or if he's in sort of the dunker spot, and yet he's just never in the way. It's just, he just always knows where to be. And what's the wild thing is that he should get a lot better. Like,
right.
Just a rookie.
I really like it when because maybe because it's kind of lazy, but like when you describe a player as like he's got great feel, and then it's like okay, because I feel like I've gotten notes when I've written that before, like please explain what you mean by this, and it's like I don't know, you can just tell, like when like he like it's all the things we're describing are what goes into having good feel. It's like spatial awareness, like anticipating what's going to happen, knowing where people are going to be, like making the right decision quickly. Like I guess
The
we could like
verticality on defense too.
yeah, like you could bullet point all of it, but it's like Lively has awesome feel, like, and it's going to serve him really well, and it's going to serve this team really well for as long as he's there, and they're lucky to have him.
It's sometimes with a player you need to speak in abstraction,
Yeah,
like to honestly like do it just and like that's just what they're like. He's just abstractly affected, like feels the perfect way to describe it. And so yeah, we can get into specifics, but just like he just understands. He gets
right. He is a basketball player. He's not an athlete that was like taught to play basketball. Like somewhere in there, he's just wired to do this. Like he just has the correct, I don't know, circuitry, and not everybody does. Like some guys you can make better at the things he's good at and develop it, but he just he's intuitively good at like one of the hardest like skill sets to ever to have.
And I have to ask, this puts us both on the spot because this was not planned at all.
Okay.
Where is he going to redraft of this year's class?
Oh my God.
And Chet, just as a reminder to our listeners, not to Grant, Chet Holmgren does not technically count. Although another follow-up question would be, let's just say we took into account every single game that was played from the start of the regular season through the playoffs right now. Where does Dereck Lively finish in Rookie of the Year? So two separate questions. I think does he end up being third? You can't erase Chet's larger body of work, I don't think.
No, I think like I'm having trouble. I mean, that's a great thought exercise because it's like, well, how much do you believe someone like Scoot, who did not make either of our all rookie teams, like still like it's too early to like conclude where he's going to be as a player, like, or, and that's an extreme example, but like it's at least a conversation, like, because Lively is already demonstrating immense value in a small role, which maybe that's the issue is like, do you still take the incredibly high ceiling player that plays a critical, like big role? Or do you just say like, I'll take Dereck Lively as my starting center for 10 years and may not make an all-star game, but he's going to be good at what I need him to be. So I don't know. I'm dodging the question because I have no idea. Like he's certainly, he's got to be like top 7. I don't know. Like he moves up a few spots to me, but I don't know. Like it's so early.
Well, I actually did. I swear to God, I didn't remember this until you started talking. I did a redraft in April. Do you want to know where I put him?
I bet you moved him down.
I did.
Yeah. So like how far?
13. So only a spot down, and so I think this is the exercise. So we're comparing, would you take these players before Dereck Lively? Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah.
Brandon Miller.
Yeah.
Amen Thompson.
I mean, that's at least a conversation, right? I think I still take Thompson, I think.
In this moment, you take Lively, but we're talking long term. You still go Amen Thompson.
I mean, there's so many questions about Thompson. I guess, yeah, I think I probably do.
Scoot Henderson.
So that's what I like. Do you take Dereck Lively over Scoot Henderson right now?
I honestly,
this is not fair.
Prisoner of the moment stuff, I probably don't. But when you're looking at long-term potential, you bet on someone who might have this transcendent impact on your offense that Dereck Lively, just because of the position he plays, won't.
It's so weird. It's almost like you're still just doing draft analysis where it's like, give me the ceiling guy, even if it's like 5% he's going to hit it. Because Lively, the best outcome for Lively is not close to the best outcome for Scoot.
Right.
And like, but the odds of Lively reaching his best outcome clearly right now are super high. And Scoot is like, I don't know, he might be out of the league. Like, what do we do with this guy?
What about Asar Thompson?
I mean, how different is he really than Amen Thompson? Like, do I have to keep the same?
I think Amen Thompson's got like the more explosive first step, I think.
The more offensive, like higher offensive ceiling, since we're talking about ceilings. I think I might take Lively because Lively's already a clear starter. Thompson may not be on a good team. I don't know.
I do think, as much as I love some of these players I'm about to name, I think this is where the debate kind of ends. So Bilal Coulibaly.
Yeah, I think you probably got to take him over him.
Jaime Jaquez Jr.
Yeah, same.
Brandon Pajemski.
Yeah, easy.
Cam Whitmore.
Yeah.
Case and Wallace.
I mean, yeah, I think so. Although Wallace is just like, how do you know what this guy's going to be capable of? Because his role is so small.
Taylor Hendricks.
Well, that's a question for you. That's your guy.
I love Taylor. I have to take Lively at this point. I think Taylor Hendricks has the higher offensive ceiling, but I don't know that he has the same just like defensive ceiling. And he's also not the passer Lively is on offense.
No.
And then the final name I had in front of him was Keontae George. That's a bet on the ceiling, but I think if we're doing a redraft right now, we're talking about ceilings for any Mavericks fans who are listening. Dereck Lively's firmly in the top 7, and it's probably closer to the top 5.
It might be top 5. Yeah, it really might be. That's wild. What a run for him.
Let's talk some Celtics.
Okay.
They are in the NBA Finals. What do you just have any Jaylen Brown Conference Finals MVP? Do you just have any? What are your Celtics thoughts? Like they're here, by the way, missing Kristaps Porzingis, who, depending on who you talk to, this answer always varied. But he was in the discussion for much of the regular season as, oh, he's the Celtics' second most important player.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying that that's what he was, but the fact that someone's in that discussion, then not available for the playoffs, and you're in the NBA Finals anyway, I think it's a testament to both their road to the finals, but also the Celtics themselves. And just a quick aside, so you have Kristaps Porzingis, who has very little playoff experience, and then all of a sudden he's just coming back after a years-long absence from it and is in the NBA Finals. Like he doesn't go through any of the, assuming he goes back, he's just like not in any of the initial games, but now he's just in the NBA Finals.
Crazy. No, what are my Celtics thoughts? I mean, like, they are the best team that we've seen in a long time where nobody seems to have like a strong opinion on like, it's just like, it's almost like we've gone through 3 rounds now and we're just like, I don't know, we'll see. Like, just like, that's how I feel. I'm firmly convinced that the regular season they had is legit and they just haven't been tested yet. And that's not a knock against them. You play the teams in front of you. Like,
I think Indy actually they clearly tested them more than any other opponent. Like all those games, with the exception of what was that game 2? They won by 16 or 13 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But like even that game had like certain. So just yeah, go ahead.
So no, I think that's true. Indy did test them at least in a different way because like that the pace and the relentless offense is really just like. That's something that other teams just can't do, even without Halliburton. I mean, oh my God, Andrew Nembhard, like, what are we doing? Like,
Andrew Nem go so hard.
He was amazing.
You're welcome.
But it still feels like, well, Indiana didn't have Halliburton for a couple of those games, and like, so what conclusions do we draw? It's like we're just on the same loop of, well, I don't know, they haven't really been, forced to prove they can offensively execute late, I mean, like sometimes they even look kind of bad in those regards. But at some point, if you just keep dominating series and you don't have one of your, I don't know where you put Porzingis now, but one of your most important guys, it's just like you've got to just kind of give the benefit of the doubt. Like you should. So whoever comes out of the West, even if assuming it's Dallas, like I don't feel like it's rational to favor somebody over Boston. But I don't know what those odds are going to look like. You know what I mean? Like I could see a world where this like we don't know enough about the Celtics yet, or this skepticism because of who they've played might result in I don't know, even odds or the West team being favored. But like at some point you just have to say Boston's really good, and maybe part of the reason we don't have a lot of answers from them is like they're so good they can win without being pushed. Really, like I don't know. I would the moment. I'm rambling, but the moment that really kind of crystallized, like, oh my God, this team is different, is against Indiana. I forget who had the ball for the Pacers, but it was a pick and roll where Jayson Tatum is the initial defender. He passes the offensive player, the ball handler, off to Jaylen Brown, who at some point like relinquishes control to Derek White, and then Drew Holiday like comes in for a steal, and it's like these guys are so stacked. Like there's nowhere to hide, like defensively and like. Just across the board, there are no weak links in terms of their top 6 guys. And sometimes, 7, 8, 9 look like there's no weak links there either. So I think that, the Celtics just don't have the kinds of flaws that you try to pick at with some of these other teams. Maybe that's, I don't know. I don't have a lot of Boston thoughts. I'm just kind of going in circles.
They're that good. And it's a disservice to them in a way, because the discourse is going to be awful if they just don't win the title. And I think they'll be
Right.
favored against whoever they face. I think both teams probably have a better shot of beating Boston than the odds will eventually say. And I'll probably ask you in a second, if you're Boston, which opponent would you prefer? But the fact that they probably had 3 legitimate candidates to win conference finals MVP is sort of, I know it's like a small sample, but it could have been, you could have told me it was Drew Holiday. I'd be like, yeah, like why the fuck not? I do think, and I know that Zach Lowe's been all over this, but the more I've thought about it, and I actually thought about in real time while I was going through the All NBA discussion, I eventually put him on my first team All NBA, is how much we overthink Jayson Tatum. Yeah. And I know like his 3-ball wasn't really falling in the conference finals. There's been more variance there this year on his jumper. But like you watch him and it feels like his biggest crime is that he's not, I guess you wouldn't call him dominant at any one thing, but he's borderline transcendent at everything. Mm-hmm. And so it's because he's just not super transcendent in this one area, like, or because he has a very good supporting cast, he's held to this weird, it's not even a high bar. It's like almost an impossible bar to reach, because the way I'll frame it is this. So if the Timberwolves or the Mavericks reach the finals, or if they win the title, I think you can probably just pencil in, not that it'll be a reward for what they did, but kind of how he had already won an MVP, but kind of how the discourse on Jokic shifted last year to where if he would have lost in the finals or not reached the finals, I bet he doesn't win MVP this year. I'd probably bet you that Edwards and or Doncic would then finish or win MVP next year, just in the top, or at least in the top 5. Tatum, it feels like, okay, the Celtics could win the title. And unless he wins finals MVP, he's not going to get that same sort of bump. And he might just not even get that bump if that happens. And I understand there's things to quibble about with Tatum. And one of the things I think is so frustrating about him is when you look at the shot selection, sometimes how long things take in the shot clock when he has the ball or bailing out on drives. He's so good now and so well-rounded that everything feels like a choice. And so it's like, well, why did he settle for that? Because he could have done this, where it's not necessarily anything the defense has done or his teammates aren't doing. But when you're sitting there quibbling about, well, it's like, yeah, okay, he's improved as a playmaker, but like he's not good enough. And it's, well, then that's a flaw of the Celtics roster, that they don't have that floor general if you don't think it's Drew Holiday or Derek White. And I've just started to think about that more and more over the past, basically since the tail end of the regular season. And Zach Lowe framed it this way, where it's just like he might be the 6th or 7th best player, and people are mad that he's not the 4th or 5th best player.
You know, it's so interesting that you asked that. Like, I had the thought watching the game 4, I guess, of like watching Tatum operate, and I thought, like, why isn't Tatum one of my favorite players? Like, what? Like, it seems like he should be, because like
he's been only 19 for almost a decade. That's an incredible feat.
His ability to not age alone should endear him to all of us who are enduring the ravages of time. He just, because like what do you need him to do? That, like, it's just the same question, because like he defends, like he gives effort, he seems like a good leader, he's never throws teammates under the bus, he is a good shooter, he can get to the basket, he's good at drawing fouls, like he's a willing like you just go down the list. And I think I'd never really thought of it, but you said like he's not dominant in any one way, but it's almost like he's an A- at everything. And it's the same thing you're saying, and that the Zach Lowe is saying, is like, he's really great, but somehow he's the one guy that it's like, I don't feel like we hold like Devin Booker to this standard, or like Jimmy Butler, or Donovan Mitchell, or some other guys you might group in that, like the back half of the top 10, or, the 5 to 15 range in the league hierarchy. Like, why is he the guy that we're like dissatisfied that he's not an A+ at everything?
Do you think it's because he had so much success early on that when you look at, let's use Jokic as an example, it was just like there was a very clear next step that didn't necessarily involve winning the title right away, but because he basically wakes up and is in the conference finals, right? It was, well, now it's like he just has to win the title or win MVP, and like that's the bar just from the jump that he's almost held to.
He really might be a victim of like a lot of early success. That's just like, it was never about like, okay, he's advanced to the next step and, oh, look at all this growth. It's like, well, you basically like started your career like on third base. Like, how come you haven't scored?
Get to home.
Like, like get there. Well, that's all you have to do. So if he wins a title and he wins finals MVP, how different is the conversation next year? And are we going to start saying like, well, where does he, like, do you even, because right now, I don't think you ask, like, and we didn't in MVP voting. It was like SGA, Luka, Jokic, and I don't know, who do we have? I can't even remember who was fourth.
Brunson.
Brunson. It was never like, let's do the Tatum versus Luka compare. Like nobody was like, we're not. That's not a real conversation yet. Like, does that then become a conversation? Like, does he get to that level, or are we always going to live in this like he's still an A-, good team around him thing?
I honestly think what hurts him, and I don't think it's fair, but when you're talking about the MVP discussion specifically, because the solo load he has to carry in theory is not as heavy because of how good and well balanced the Celtics are. Yeah. That's always going to hurt him in that discussion. But if you're talking about who is better, where it's just, so I framed it this way. I had Jalen Brunson. Did I have him 4th or 5th on my MVP ballot, but I didn't have him on first team All NBA. I gave that spot to Tatum because I just think Tatum is the better player. And look, if you're asking legitimately, if you want to start a team and have to build out your team from there, are you building around Jayson Tatum or Jalen Brunson? It's Jayson Tatum. That's just the end. Jalen Brunson made it a discussion, which kudos to Jalen Brunson for doing so. But like, that's, I think, the discussion that changes, or I think, first of all, I think it should already change, because you want to say that Joel Embiid is better than Jayson Tatum. That's fucking cool. Availability is also a skill, and Jayson Tatum is as available as anyone. Mm-hmm. That needs to put him, again, if you're saying I need to start a team right now, I need to put him ahead of Embiid. He needs to put him ahead of Kawhi, and forget about the future stuff because ages would factor in, whatever. Tatum's only 19. That's going to benefit him. So, but like, honestly, go into that. So Jokic, you're taking over Tatum. Mm-hmm. Luka, I think you're definitely taking over Tatum.
Yeah.
Okay. Giannis? Like after that, it's Giannis. Is it like, here's the thing with Giannis, who is still one of the 5 best players in basketball, is you have to, and that's what makes Tatum so appealing.
Yeah.
Is there's limitations to then maybe his playmaking, let's say, but like there's going to be limitations to Giannis's playmaking, and it doesn't matter. I would say even maybe more so than Shea would be another name to throw in here. It doesn't, or Brunson, or whoever you want to throw, it really doesn't matter who you have around him, in a way that of everyone we just named, even Luka, like I think it kind of matters who you have around Luka.
Sure. Yeah.
Jokic, I don't think it matters. But like, is Tatum the only other guy where you look at it doesn't, like among top 10 or 15 players where it doesn't matter who you put, like you could, not that it doesn't matter, they need to be talented, but it could be any archetype of elite talent, and it just doesn't matter.
That's right. I mean, even Jokic, you'd say like you probably need like multiple good defenders around him, right? Great like point. I mean, certainly that was true in years past, less true now as he's improved, but like, no, like for Tatum,
also has multiple elite defenders around him.
Right. Also, weird how that works. But like, no, that's really, you're dead on. Like for Tatum, if everybody else you mentioned, it's like, okay, we have this guy, so that means we definitely got to have some of this over here. Like, but if you have Tatum and you're starting the team, it's like, still got a blank canvas. Pick literally any type of player. He will not overlap. It's not like Tatum. It's like Tatum is going to take away from this guy in any way. And that goes back to like the A- at everything. Like, and really that might undersell him. He might just be a flat A at some stuff and A+ at other things. But like, he's the most scalable superstar we have. Maybe that's the way to put it. Like you could put him on any team in any role and he would add value.
Yeah. I think I'm with, that's the best way to frame it there. And it's like, when you're talking about what's the A+ skill, I still think like, when you're talking about would you want to take like an off the dribble 3-pointer? I know the percentages don't necessarily back it up. You're probably still counting the number of players who you'd prefer over him there on one hand, right?
Because he's going to get it off. Like that's the other thing. He's an enormous wing. Like that, just the size alone is like a huge asset over someone like Booker, for example.
Because he doesn't need to check the first or the second best assignment every night. Like he's criticized for like, well, how elite is he really if it's like he doesn't have to do that?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not really rooting for any of these teams necessarily. Like, I don't have like a favorite, but like, I think if Tatum and the Celtics were to win it, it would kind of feel, I don't know, it'd be like, I'd be okay with that because we can like maybe close the book on some of the dumb stuff that we've thought about.
The problem is we won't. And I think it'll come, he has to win. And I'm not saying this is right, but he probably has to win finals MVP and by like a clear margin to where, look at the conference finals where it's, well, it could have been Drew, it could have been Tatum, it could have been Jalen. Yeah. There can't be any of that because people will use that as like some means to discredit him. Like, well, let's see him do it if you take one of these, like, or two of these guys off the team.
Yeah.
And So I think it's not just that the Celtics need to win the title, that he needs to win Finals MVP. If we're looking for a meaningful shift in the way that he has talked about nationally on the, some of the podcasts that you or I might pay attention to and actually assign value to, and then some of the talking heads that we don't really listen to, but other people get bent out of shape from, like it needs to be a comfortable Finals MVP victory. And they also it can't be, oh, he won Finals MVP, but they lost the finals, and like barely anyone's ever. No, it needs to be a championship and a comfortable Finals MVP.
Yeah, I think. Unfortunately, I think that's correct. but like you're not making this argument. We keep doing this where it's like, I know you're not saying this, but it's being.
And it's funny because we know after all these years, we're not saying it for either one of our benefits. Right. It's just like we're saying it for people listening who probably don't give a fuck.
But the idea of all of the, if you just reverse it and it's like, just ask the question, if you took Jrue Holiday off the Celtics, would that foreclose a chance of winning a title? Like, yeah, probably. Derek White, yeah. Like, no, they could get by. Porzingis, they just swept the team without Porzingis. Derek White, like, yeah, they could, probably get there. Jaylen Brown, even, like, maybe. But if you take Tatum off the Celtics, it's like, well, suddenly he doesn't seem quite so dispensable or like interchangeable with all these other good players on the team. It's like, no, clearly that's the guy on the team. It's just if you reverse it, suddenly all the stuff of like, well, he's good and all, but he's not. It's like, no, he is vital. He's the single most important player on the best team in the league. Like it's not. I don't feel like that's actually debatable at this point. Although certainly it's made to seem that way sometimes.
Well, it's not Derek White's not the most important player of this team.
Well, isn't that a thing? Like all year, everybody's rushing to be like, who really has changed things for the Celtics? And it would never be Jayson Tatum. It would just be some other guy. If Porzingis had his moment. Derek White. All great players, Jrue Holiday, but it's like Tatum's the best player on this team, and this is the best team in the league all year, and certainly looks like it in the playoffs. At some point, we're overthinking this if we're denigrating Tatum like at all.
And it's our inability to not be able to just separate his value from the fact, okay, yes, he has this supporting cast, but he can have value independent. I don't understand why we can't. Okay, like, yeah, there are some luxuries that he's afforded, but then there's also just some luxuries that he's not. Like, think about it this way. And I don't think he deserves credit for Jaylen Brown's success the way that, and this is going to come across terrible, like the way that Jamal Murray should probably give Jokic a cut of all his contracts moving forward. But at the same time, is Jaylen Brown as good without like if you were to remove, and to frame it this way, you put Jayson Tatum without Jaylen Brown on a different roster versus putting Jaylen Brown on that same roster without Jayson Tatum, who's going to be the better player? What is the better chance of being the better team? And the answer is clearly Tatum. Yeah. And I think you can do that with anyone else on this roster. And the other thing is just like, folks, and I'm not talking to anyone in particular, and not you, because we have to use that clarifier. We have on-off data. Like, right. Do you know what the Celtics net rating was when Tatum played without Derek White, Jaylen Brown, and Jrue Holiday?
Was it double digits? I bet it was
19.1.
Oh, Jesus.
So, and it's just like, I understand it's a small sample size, but like, come on, that's right. Like, we have that right in front of, that's so accessible. Yeah. So I didn't think that this was going to turn into a Jayson Tatum underrated / underappreciated discussion, but it did. And I think we're both in agreement that yes, he is.
Yeah, here we are. We should talk Pacers, right? We haven't talked Pacers yet.
Yes, and I'm excited because Caitlin Cooper went on the low post from Go Subscribe to Basketball She Wrote if you didn't already. I've not listened to the episode, which is good in the sense that I feel like I would just end up attributing everything I say to what she thinks. That's whatever happens whenever I read or listen to her. But it's also sad because it's like, I'm going to say some shit. I'm going to go back and listen to that podcast and be like, oh, like, no, I wish I could take back everything I literally just said about the Pacers. But go check out that episode. I love Caitlin Cooper. She's great. It's cool that she was on the low post. But the Pacers, like, what are your thoughts kind of going into the offseason? I have like we both, I'm sure, have their sort of cap situation here. We have Pascal Siakam's free agency. Where do you want to go with this? This is the question we have to ask. Where do the Pacers go from here, Grant?
Right. Like, so you can't avoid thinking that as they're in the process, as they were in the process of getting eliminated. And like, I don't know if it's just me kind of pushing back against the like, okay, now this is the conversation we have to have. And here's the things I got to start thinking about. But I just found myself kind of like, it's fucking awesome that the Pacers were this good this year, and like that they found this kind of identity, that they know what they're going to be, that they swung big on a trade and it worked out. And it's just like, I think, I don't know. It's nice that a team that didn't bottom out, that is like historically refused to bottom out, just found a way to like get itself back into the, like, we're serious. We're going to need to be taken seriously for a long time now without going the conventional route. So that was awesome. Like everything about the Pacers season to me is a huge win. I know you mentioned Caitlin Cooper. We had her on for the look ahead. And I don't think, I wish I could remember, but like, no, the level of success Indiana has had was not foreseen by anyone, including her, who knows more about the Pacers than anyone has or ever will. So like, it also, you add in, well, this was surprising, so that makes it even better. So where do they go from here? Like, I don't know if they need to. I mean, you said it's like the Siakam free agency. I think the report today I saw was like, I think Shams had it like they're going to max him, but it wasn't clear if that meant 5 years or 4. We've had that conversation about like, which of those do you give him? Which of those do you need to? Which of those was hypothetically agreed to before the trade was executed? But other than that, it's just kind of like, we hope Halliburton stays healthy all year and is an MVP candidate for more than the first, 30 games or whatever. And you just kind of run it back and you make some decisions about the center rotation. Maybe, like, I don't know, that you hope Jarris Walker makes an appearance at some point.
So the Pascal Siakam, because we need to get into like what we think they need, but I wanted to ask you this macro question. Because I think I think this is a lazy take, but I think people might compare this to when the Hawks reached the conference finals was that 2021?
Yes.
And it was just like, no, like they didn't belong there. And you could say, well, like the Knicks didn't have OG or Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, everyone was injured by the end of that series. This is different. This is just, it's so much different from that, in part because like everything just makes so much more sense when you're looking at what the Pacers have built between Halliburton and Siakam. And when you're talking about the Pacers offseason, I've seen people mention cap space. It's just, they don't have cap space because Siakam is coming back. Like, you don't make that trade if they give him, we've talked about this. So the 4-year max from them is 189.5 and the 5-year max is 245.3. The 5-year max I still think I'd be pretty shocked if he gets the full boat over 5 years. If it's less over 5 years, it wouldn't surprise me, but that's the one. Like, do you have any thoughts on what you would expect this to be?
I think if I haven't mentioned this, I think Indiana, I would have no problem with Indiana going full 4-year max. I just don't think you have to go 5 at the full number.
Yeah.
And if they did go 5, I would only be like, I don't know, it's like I get a say in this. Like, I'd only be cool with it but like, if you do the full 5 years, it's got to be sub max, I think, by a decent amount. I just don't know if Siakam would want that necessarily. So, because he might want to just get back on the market again in 4 with the full max. But yeah, 4 years full max, you beat the market that way. Nobody else can offer him more over 4 years. And like the scenario of him leaving because, I want the 5th year seems crazy. So that's what I would be going for. And anything under the max in any capacity, I think, is probably a win for Indiana.
Yeah. And I mean, even if it's just the 4-year max, I think that ends up being a win for them. And they, I don't know that we learned anything about them in this series looking at, okay, well, what do they need going to the offseason? It's like they do kind of need like a bigger wing defender type. Maybe that's Jarris Walker. They could certainly use like a Buddy Hield analog, as stupid as that says. I know it's good that Tyrese Halliburton has that experience off the ball, but you'd also like to not have to see him necessarily used in all those instances. I also am wondering how and Andrew Nembhard was good all year, but like this emergence of Andrew Nembhard, and you have TJ McConnell entering the final year of his deal. Like, where does Benedict Mathurin fit into this group now? You could also talk about, this is a team where, okay, like we have they have their 2 bigs of the future, but then you kind of look at it and say, well, is rebounding an issue for them at all? And it's like, they rebounded fine. I think they had a fairly high offensive rebounding rate against the Celtics, but the Celtics did not. They were playing they weren't playing dual big lineups with Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis. So you could just look at Indiana was not a good defensive rebounding team in the playoffs or the regular season. And so that's an area that it gets you into. No, we're not moving on from Siakam or Turner, but do we bring back Obi Toppin? Do we extend Isaiah Jackson? It gets you into, and then I think it impacts the type of forward maybe that you would want to, or wing that you would want to target. Can they pitch in there at all? But before throwing it to you, their financial situation is going to allow them to do some stuff, because even if you pencil in Siakam for his max salary next season, and then you're going to keep, I would assume that you're going to keep the Obi Toppin cap, well, maybe not the cap hold because it's $20 million. Then you also have the not Isaiah Jackson, Jalen Smith has a player option for 5.4. I guess he'll decline it, although he wasn't really playing prominent minutes for them by the end. But like, this is my point being, this is a team that if you re-sign Pascal Siakam to his max, you should still have access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So over $12 million, the biannual exception, which is almost like $5 million now or whatever. And then there's also a chance that you're able to keep, I would say, Obi Toppin and or Jalen Smith under sort of that structure. And so you do have moves. And by the way, this is in addition to, you're going to have, I think, three tradable future first round picks in addition to swaps, and Benedict Mathurin and Jarris Walker if you really want to go balls to the walls here. And I don't even know why I just phrased it that way. But what are you, when you're looking at what they need and then their ability to make different degrees of moves, if you're running this team, how are you going about this offseason in terms of, one, what is your single biggest priority aside from re-signing Pascal Siakam? And then two, how aggressive are you willing to be about going to address that single biggest priority?
Yeah, I think my number one priority would be finding somebody to guard the guys that Aaron Nesmith is guarding, but are a little too big for Aaron Nesmith usually. So I think that was maybe the first thing you said, is like, you need a bigger wing / combo forward type guy that is gonna, that isn't just giving up huge amounts of size to some of the wing matchups that Nesmith has to guard. And like, it's weird. Looking at the roster just generally, it's weird that like, I really like Nesmith. Like he's one of my favorite role players, but I think that is a spot they need to upgrade. I don't know how you're going to address the rebounding stuff, like without fundamentally changing what I like about this team a lot.
Maybe like it's like, oh, is Andre Drummond coming off the bench for you now?
Yeah, you do it that way, but it's like, I like the spacing Turner provides, and Turner's had some incredible moments in these playoffs. Like, I'm not messing with his minutes. Obviously, you're not messing with Siakam's minutes. Halliburton's locked in, so it's kind of like at the 2-3 spot that I'd look for. It weirdly, I don't like this. They cannot get him. They will not get him. But it's funny that like OG Anunoby feels like he'd be a really good fit here. It's just like, well, the Raptors tried that with him and Siakam. There was a ceiling on it. But you know what I mean? Someone with real size as a forward wing that is going to make threes. Doesn't have to be some, like, you can't find the guy that checks that box and also checks the Buddy Hield box, because that player doesn't really exist. But
if
like,
they did, holy shit.
If they did, that's a max player. Who are we describing? OG Anunoby's defense with Buddy Hield's 3-point shooting. Is there a person?
You know what? It's hard. It's hard to think about like checking the shooting box and like that. There's just nobody.
It's not there. So I guess if you got to pick one, I think I'd skew defense, obviously, because this team's offense is going to be fucking awesome no matter what. So I think that's the way I'd go. I don't really have I don't know if I have a player in mind. You got someone?
Well, here's one. Do you think looking at free agents and who they could realistically get, does someone like Malik Beasley do enough to fulfill some of the Buddy Hield stuff?
I think he gets you pretty close to Buddy Hield. I mean, I think probably with the same or like worse issues defensively. The
other name, like free agent that stood out to me for them was Derrick Jones Jr.
Oh my God. That'd be fun.
You think that would be like, because they have the spacing to make it work. I don't know if the 3-point shooting will hold here. I mean, Tyrese Halliburton's as transcendent a playmaker as anyone in the league at this point. So I like, you kind of, when you look at him, he's a little spindly. So it feels like they should get a stronger wing, but it's like, look at look at who he has defended and how well he has done. And then you just throw in, I know he's getting a little older, but like the athleticism and pop is still there.
Yeah. I think he'd be phenomenal. And like, I haven't really thought about what I think he's going to get in free agency. But to go from a minimum to like the full mid-level, which might be on the high end for him, but also maybe not because
I guess like, would you go are you
I don't
giving
know.
3-4 years for that? And Dallas has ways of, I think he would stay in Dallas because they have ways of accessing the full mid-level, which is the only way they could keep him is to use the mid-level because they're not 120% raise off a minimum isn't going to do it for the non-bird rights. But if they can't or they won't for some reason, I don't know why if they have the mid-level to give or he's willing to come back for a chunk of that, I think at this point you almost have to keep him. But so Indy's not necessarily in a position to outbid unless Dallas's books become so Dallas should, as of right now, they have ways of just having the full mid-level and then running back basically their current roster. And they could they could trade Tim Hardaway Jr. for a cheaper player if they need to open up more wiggle room beneath the tax. But that's a name I stood out. I guess my main point of that was the thing that we both agree, by the way, because I agree with you, that their biggest need doesn't feel like it could be addressed in free agency, not just because of the resources they have available where it's not actual cap space. And if they have actual cap space, something ridiculous has happened. Did Siakam leave?
They got bigger problems if they have cap space.
And then that's when you get into, okay, well, what will they do on the trade market and how aggressive should they be?
Well, that's the more interesting question, right? Because like on the one hand, you say, well, we got Tyrese Halliburton. He's in the very early stages of his new max. Like we're, nothing urgent here. But then you also are about to max out Pascal Siakam for his early 30s. And so like you're not all in by any stretch, but like your team's going to get fairly expensive and you just won a couple playoff rounds and Tyrese Halliburton was on track to be like a top 5 MVP guy before he got hurt and still was an all NBA player. So like, what are you waiting for? I guess that suggests you need to kind of operate with a little more urgency than you might normally think for a Pacers team. I guess too, some people are going to say they beat two teams that had a bunch of injuries, like getting really aggressive now might be a mistake because we're overestimating how good this team is. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's something to that. That's not a ridiculous argument to make, but I think if you have Siakam that you're going to pay all this money and you have Halliburton entering his prime, like it's probably go time. So I think I'd skew towards more urgency, but like, what does that look like? Are you thinking you're going to so you could put together some, salary pretty easily to get a good number and you throw those 3 picks you mentioned in there? Like
I was wrong, by the way. It's because of how they structured the Toronto deal. So they're giving up the 24 first and the 26 first, I believe. They can trade 2 first round picks and 4 swaps.
Then like who's the guy? Like that
I think because you said urgency, and if you were putting, I won't say everything, but let's say mostly everything on the table, there's the level of urgency. Okay, well then this is like it almost. Mm-hmm. But the combination of, and I'm not saying everything, but 2 firsts, up to 4 swaps, Jarris Walker and Benedict Mathurin, does that get you into the Mikal Bridges discussion?
I think it should. I feel like Brooklyn, just based on some of the offers they have not accepted for him, just might say like, nah, that's not enough. If you're Indiana, I think Bridges is pretty darn close to like the type of player we were talking about. He's not the volume shooter, but like in a smaller role, that guy's been lights out from 3. So, I mean,
and the combination of him and Nesmith defensively, because you talked about upgrading the Nesmith spot, it could also just be like, well, maybe we're having Nesmith and Mikal Bridges play together. And we're bringing them
Siakam and Turner, and oh my god, that gets very fun. Just thinking about that.
But and so I think I would do it if you told me it's Mikal Bridges coming, I would give up everything because I think that this team is that close. If you could keep, especially if it's okay, you don't need to send Nesmith out in that deal. But now that gets you into another interesting discussion because Mikal Bridges is cheap relative to his just the level of player that he is. If you're Indy and you're not moving Siakam or Halliburton, and then it's, I mean, like you ideally don't want to move Turner, I wouldn't think. Your matching salary becomes, all right, it's TJ McConnell is your 4th highest paid player as of right now behind Siakam. Well, Siakam's max, Turner, and Halliburton next year at 9.3. And maybe Obi Toppin ends up making more, but you're not going to end up like moving him. Oh, he's their 5th. Nesmith, excuse me. I was saying if you don't want to move him. So TJ McConnell at 9.3 becomes your 5th. highest paid player. So like you're looking at him, Mathurin makes 7.2, Jarris Walker's at 6.4. Did Jalen Smith pick up his player option? If he didn't, you have Isaiah Jackson at 4.4. So like whatever they do, and by the way, they have Ben Shepherd floating around. Like he's shown some things defensively and been able to move away from the ball.
He played a lot. Like he was in the rotation
stuff, but like you would have to give up so much of it to protect your core when it comes to salary, because like, let's just use Jeremy Grant as an example. I'm not saying they should go after him, but because his number is so high, you're now consolidating like 3 or 4 if you're not trading Turner, Siakam, or Halliburton, like you're consolidating 3 or 4 guys into one, and Jeremy Grant's just not the player you want to do that for.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, this is what's facing like every team that is, in this position that's trying to upgrade. It's just like Jeremy Grant isn't the guy. It's like you're not getting Bridges, and Jeremy Grant's not it. And so like, where does that leave you? If you had to choose between including McConnell or Mathurin in a trade,
don't make me answer that. I would pick Mathurin at this point
to trade.
I think because
I would too.
McConnell's going to give you more of off the bench in theory of what you need, but I also kind of understand the whole. Well, if you're playing Nembhard and TJ McConnell, and so many of one of their minutes is going to overlap with Halliburton, because both those guys are better with the ball, specifically McConnell. Are you eating too much into Halliburton's role? And as Benedict Mathurin still has a ways to go, he's probably the best off-ball player of those 3. I guess you could make a case for Nembhard at that point. So like that, you get into that discussion, but I would pick Mathurin just because in a vacuum, I still think he should yield. Like if you were going to get a first-round pick for TJ McConnell, you probably just need to make the move because you have Nembhard and Halliburton.
Right.
But I think Benedict Mathurin, in theory, because it still has a little bit of the mystery box element to it, is the better trade asset, and therefore, like I would say, move him.
But also there would be riots in Indiana if you traded TJ McConnell at this point.
That's like true too. Isn't the statue already up?
Probably. What's the statue doing? What pose is it in?
Is it? I think it's like him sneaking baseline for the steal, like crouching.
Probably that. Yeah,
is that the one?
I think that's probably it. What a great series for McConnell, or great playoffs for McConnell.
So you run into these like names that you could think of, and it just gets the player that they need is one that's, or their single biggest priority feels like it could be the single biggest priority of so many teams.
Yeah.
That it's just not that they're going to have to overpay to get them. It feels like it's going to require a level of aggression that I still don't think that they're going to show, just because it would be even the Siakam trade. I like that they kind of got quote unquote rewarded by getting to the conference finals. I like seeing teams go for it, but that was like an ultra reasonable price to pay for a borderline all NBA player.
And like, again, I mean, it wasn't risk free. Like the guy's going to be a free agent. So it's like that's part. No, I mean, it was bold, but it was the appropriate level of risk for that type of player for this team at that time. Like, I think that was fine. I would also say, like, I know I said I might skew towards some urgency just because of how good the team, like, I would be totally okay if they ran it back. Like I think that's fine. I think that's part of the, like, well, they overachieved and we're all happy about it. It was a fun season. If they bring this exact group back, I don't think anybody's mad about it, and they could absolutely sell it as like, we didn't think with the assets we have right now that the right guy was out there. So we're going to be patient. We're going to, that's an easy sell to me because of how much this team overachieved relative to like preseason expectations.
So I disagree, mostly because I think that highly and urgently also of the window they kind of have with Siakam there. But I would agree to the extent of, okay, well, we didn't go out and try to get Mikal Bridges or Jeremy Grant or just like insert bigger name.
We're not going
Zach over Houston or whatever. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I was thinking we're not going Zach LaVine shopping because we got to do something. It's not going to be that.
Right. But I do think, like, if you told me, like, it needs to be like we spent, like, if we have the full non-tax, but like we spent it, and it was Caleb Martin. Did we poach Caleb Martin from Miami, who has to deal with second apron concerns if he opts out of his contract? They might not be able to. Well, they could pay him because he's his own free agent, but maybe they don't want to because of the second apron concerns. We went out, we traded for Dorian Finney-Smith. So guys who are not solving all your problems in a vacuum, but they make you better enough to where it's okay. We're banking on some development from Jarris Walker here. We didn't upend any of like our young. We didn't trade Shepherd. We didn't trade Mathurin. But like, I do think that and this is such a weird way to frame it. I want them to get someone that you could envision potentially closing games for them.
Sure.
And so if that's a Dorian Finney-Smith is probably not maybe he is the worst player where it's, well, maybe he's not closing games for you because you have Turner, Siakam, Halliburton are just locked in. And then I think Nesmith might be almost a lock. And then it's, well, does Nembhard make more sense in certain instances? But he would be in the conversation for one of the final two spots, I would think, in addition to Shepherd maybe being in there and Jarris Walker. If you're going to run it back, though, you need like a monster sophomore campaign from Jarris Walker at that point.
And you need Mathurin.
I feel like that's an uncomfortable spot to be.
Oh, for sure. And you would need Mathurin to like take a pretty big step. I think if you're looking to do
you?
No, I think if you run it back and you say, like, again, which I would be okay. I'm being conservative. Like, I'd be okay with it. I think it's justifiable. It's a huge ask for Jarris Walker, who like just didn't play basically. But I think you'd need him to be, I don't know where in the rotation he'd need to be. He'd need to feature, though, I think Walker would. And then Mathurin, I think, would need to make it like, oh, is it Nesmith or is it Mathurin tonight? Like, it's got to be like that level of like where Mathurin is like clearly bringing stuff to the table every night, doesn't feel superfluous, which to me, like right now, he kind of does. Like, I don't know. It doesn't feel to me like Indiana needs Mathurin. Like, I don't know what he does. That's like, you got to have this on the floor. That he needs to get to that level where it's like, oh, he's giving us something that we can't get from Nesmith, Nembhard, McConnell, whatever that is.
As of right now, is there a chance? I'm not trying to, it's been so long since we saw him play, and I do think he made some strides this year. So I want to make that clear before I know a lot of Pacers fans love the idea of Ben Mathurin. Is how many of it next year, let's just say they run it back. TJ McConnell, Ben Shepherd, Andrew Nembhard. How many of those guys are in front of Benedict Mathurin in the rotation? Is it all three?
That's the thing. If it's, I have never been the biggest Mathurin fan through his long and storied career. He's like been around for 10 minutes, but like I've never been my favorite guy. I think, I guess what I was saying is like, he has to be above a couple of those guys for the Pacers to get like, to really justify like not making a move. I don't know if he would be, right? Like, basically, just imagine he was healthy for this playoff run. It's like McConnell was like, you had to have McConnell out there on the floor for long stretches. Like, Nembhard played his ass off, like especially without Halliburton, and Nesmith is like, well, you had no better wing defensive option. Like, so again, I don't think Mathurin deserves to be ahead of any of those guys. Shepherd maybe. But like, we've seen so little of Shepherd outside of, this playoff run, really, that like, I don't know.
He endeared himself to me with his defensive effort in summer league. And there's just, once you do that, I have him ahead of Tyrese Halliburton in the rotation.
You're in. Okay, that's fair. I mean, do you think Mathurin's ahead of any of those guys?
I think you could probably make a case that he should be ahead of McConnell just because of how limiting McConnell can be if he doesn't have the ball on offense. But that still requires, okay, well, then Benedict Mathurin needs to make heavier lifts on defense, which is like the appeal of Ben Shepherd, who kind of doesn't need the ball, works his ass off defensively. So I think he honestly has a case above all of them, but it's a case. It's not inarguable.
The Pacers would very much prefer that it was inarguable in favor of Mathurin. Like that would be a best case, like where he was just like, and that's not, he's going into his third year.
2 seasons of basketball, yeah. Like
if he takes like a decent sized leap, it's like, oh yeah, no, right. This is the guy we took in the lottery. This is what he's supposed to be. Everything, we're on track. Like, that's totally plausible. So far, I'm not super confident that he's going to be more than like a 6-man scoring type. I know that's pigeonholing him really early, but that's just the vibe I get so far.
So just very quickly, Siakam back. You think Obi Toppin is back?
That's a tough one, right? He's restricted. You mentioned like 10 million for him or to get up, over the McConnell figure, maybe. Like,
yeah, I mean, he should. I think he gets more than the 9.3 that McConnell's make. His cap hold is over 20. I don't think he's getting that much.
No. Do you think he's getting like, maybe like the question is, isn't he more valuable to some other teams than he is to the Pacers? Just especially if you think Jarris Walker is going to have like any significant role going forward.
Here's my thing with that is because the speed at which the Pacers play and the spacing they have, is that he? Because like he's a one position player.
Yeah.
And there are probably very few teams that have room for that in their front court at the moment.
Yeah, I'm asking because I don't know. Like, it's a weird, because the style is tailor made for him to do all the things that he's best at. and that just won't be true really almost anywhere else. But it's like, how valuable can you be a serious, like if you want to be a real Eastern Conference contender, can you give a guy that's super limited and like has a niche skill set, the mid-level or like that close to that number? Like I just don't know. I would guess he'll probably be back. I think they can match. Like, I don't think anyone's coming over the top with like 15 a year or 20.
Right. I think you might as well just preserve the salary slot.
Yeah, there you go. Good point. Yeah, maybe that's it. So Siakam back, Toppin back, if only for asset preservation, maybe.
Jalen Smith, do you think he winds up entering free agency? $5.4 million player option.
Man, I think it might be time for me to give up on him. Is he going to do better than, like, he's given up 5? That means he'd probably want to be able to sign like a multi-year deal worth like 8 to 10. Like, I don't know if that's out there for him.
With the way that Toppin ended up playing in the postseason too, it feels like he will if Smith enters free agency. And I also think that even Jackson, getting him on an extension will be a higher priority than bringing back Smith. And I just don't know which team is going to, I mean, I guess there are teams that could use a floor spacing big, but a lot of them are just going to be teams that are going to offer him less than 5. Like Phoenix might like to reunite with Jalen Smith at this point, but that'll be a minimum.
Right. Yeah, no, I think ultimately he's not, like, there's almost no way that I could imagine where his 24-25 salary will be greater than the player option who'd have to decline to sign a new deal someplace.
Oh, interesting. I'm just wondering, like, does Detroit, like, we just need spacing. Let's just go get Jalen Smith at $10 million for 2 years or something.
I mean, good for him. I'm taking that if I'm him. But I would bet he's going to be back, and because they'll just pick that option up, and then
I think I don't know what's going to happen with his player option. I honestly don't have a feel. I'm going to say he's not back, because if he opts in, I think he'll get traded.
Okay. Yeah. I think that would be the smarter course, because you don't, especially if you bring Toppin back, like he's your 4th big guy, like, and maybe 5th if Walker can play up a little bit. So yeah, he's not exactly integral to the operation.
And do you think from TJ McConnell, Andrew Nembhard, Ben Shepherd, Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, how many of those guys are back, or how many? I'm going to set the over under of those guys being traded at 0.5.
I think I'd go under. Like, why?
All 5 of them are just coming back.
Yeah, right? I think so. I mean, I'm going to manifest I'm cool with it if you run it back thinking.
You went from this team needs to express urgency to like bring everybody
Well, you can
back.
tell I was like really trying to waffle on the urgency thing. I talked myself into it. I think in my heart of hearts, I'm okay with this team looking very similar and banking on like a couple of key organic growth plays. And if those don't work out, then you maybe start thinking about what to do with those 2 firsts.
Some news items to get to before we close out here. Ty Lue, 5 years, $70 million extension with the Clippers. I think he's still one of the best coaches in the league. That's just, and the coaching market has changed. Monty Williams really just changed the way that head coaches are getting paid. Thoughts on that? I mean, good. I mean, my first thought was when I saw it, JJ Redick really is going to coach the Clippers, Lakers next season, isn't he?
Oh, we should talk about that. I think Ty Lue, I agree. I don't know where I'd rank him if I were ranking coaches, but he's up there. The players all seem to like him. He's always someone that gets mentioned as like, oh, his tactical adjustments are good. Like, I don't know, smarter people than me have had that opinion of him for a long time. He's won a championship. Like, this is just the going. Monty Williams, like, I forget where I saw it today, but I feel like every coach that is out for an extension is going to say like, look what Monty Williams got. Look what's going on over there. Can I get money? You clearly have to give me Monty Williams money if that's what that's worth to Detroit. So like, he kind of wrecked the market.
The Mike Brown, that's the other news item here, is the Mike Brown extension talks breaking down with Sacramento. He has technically 2 years left on his deal, the second of which is a mutual option.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know like how that works. Like who gets to exercise the mutual option first, and then they wait for the other one. But
he's lame ducking this season is what it looks like, which is not a great setup. I kind of feel like the Kings are starting to Kangs a little bit with this, because it's like, I don't know what the demand, like what Mike Brown wants, but I don't think it's realistic for the Kings to like let him coach this year out and go on a coaching search. Who knows? Coaches get fired all the time, but like, who are you going to go get that is a clear upgrade over Mike Brown? And if about
I know,
money?
I
Like,
know there's
what's
always
going on?
surprises here, but what is the job that you could envision opening up that's going to be like Chicago isn't going to spend a lot on coaches if it does decide to get rid of Billy Donovan after extending him, by the way, is like what is this like what is the situation that you could like, and even if it does, you would still have the ability to, you might have to pay more of a premium at that point. I think they should have just extended him too. I mean, just because it doesn't count against a salary cap, I just fire him later. I'm gonna do that.
Right. Who cares? No, it definitely it gave me like some little like spidey tingles of like, oh no, don't like
The
come on.
only so the thing that will worry me is so Mike Brown will be part of it, but I'm just not on the same level of King's pessimism as you are. I will say
You
though,
are.
if we find out that they weren't even like kind of aggressive, like I'm not even saying they had to make a trade, but they weren't kind of aggressive in acquiring somebody who cracks their closing lineup, and then they don't offer Malik Monk the 4 years and 70 plus million. If we find out like, yeah, I was gonna listen to the Kings, but the offer just came from Orlando and I went there and I never heard from Sacramento, that's when I'll start sounding the alarm bells.
Okay.
I can't get there off the Mike Brown stuff. Other coaching news too. Brian Keefe is now the permanent head coach of the Washington Wizards. So condolences.
God bless him.
I'm just kidding. Players there really, I don't have a strong opinion on it. Other than the players really seem to like him. And at this juncture, I think that's important. And he did, I think he was I don't know if that's the primary reason, but like he did saddle Denny Avdia with more offensive creation responsibility. Felt like they were trying harder on defense. So I didn't see any reason why he shouldn't have it. I don't know if I've seen enough to say, well, like that dude's like it's a standout. I mean, was he the reason Jules Bernard excelled? Because if it is, then I'm all the way in on him. But I think that was fine. It does seem like maybe they waited to provide cover here, but a lot of issues sometimes are just like, oh, well, they didn't stage a thorough coach. They just went with whoever the interim guy was. And they did, like weren't they the first, like they had this opening before anyone else because he was an interim head coach.
Right.
And like only the Lakers right now have a vacancy in front of them.
Cleveland's the other one.
Holy fuck, I forgot about Cleveland.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was any big thoughts on the Washington Wizards?
I got nothing. I think if any, ultimately it was going to be hard for them to like go out and like, I don't think they even want to, but to go find an established coach to sign on for like, buddy, this is going to be a while. Like this is going to be a process. So I think it fits that it's an interim guy that was there already, has been an assistant, like got good results with a bad team. Like that checks a lot of boxes.
I will say this is related. I was listening to Believe in Wizards, one of their recent episodes, friend of the podcast, Matt Moderno, and his co-host Shahadi White. And they actually were going through different Wizards kind of takes and trade ideas. And I think 3 of them were mine. It was 2 trade. They didn't mention me by name, but it was 2 trade ideas. And then who's the most likely Hall of Famer currently on the Wizards. And it was just funny. And I mean this in the nicest, but like just shitting all over my opinions, basically on all 3 fronts. And I'm just like, I'm here for it.
Wait, who is the most likely Hall of Famer on the Wizards in your opinion right now?
Bilal. Who else is? I guess it could be Denny Avdia, but like he's already in progress of his career, and it's will he reach the level necessary to get to the Basketball Hall of Fame? I was just like, Bilal is just so young and has just he still has the could be anything factor.
Right. The only more not galaxy brain, but the like, who really could be someone that's not even on the team yet. Like, some guy in 8th grade right now. Like that's who it is.
I do say I strongly disagree with Jahadi said it was probably Jordan Poole is the answer. Boy. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Like I'm like trying to think if Jordan Poole's going to be on an NBA roster in 4 years. I'm not really thinking about the Hall of Fame.
Well, I mean, it is the Basketball Hall of Fame. So if he's like really good in Turkey for the next like 12 years, who knows?
I love you, Believe in Wizards. So that was all that I honestly, I get a kick sometimes out of, or even if you see the timeline, well, I know you're not on Twitter, but screenshots from articles I write that go around and sometimes they're attributed to me, sometimes they're not, but it's funnier when my name's not tied to it. It's just a screenshot, no link or anything. And people are just shitting all over it. And I used to get like sad. And now I get like a sadistic pleasure out of it where I'm like,
hey, you're creating content for other people.
I'm driving discussion that has no meaning, apparently.
Right. It's it's God's work. JJ Redick, you mentioned. Was it Shams today? I forget where I keep saying I forget where I saw it because I just like am skimming everything. it seems like he's the odds-on favorite, right, for this
They were
Lakers
talking
job.
about who, and I don't know if you saw this, like who would
Looking at
be on his
assistant.
assistant
It was
staff.
it was Chris Haynes said reported that he's like looking around, he's making calls and stuff. So
I
like,
saw
and he said,
Rondo might be on it.
no, really?
That was the report from The Athletic that Rondo could be added to the Lakers coaching staff. Yeah.
Oh my God. Do you have, it hasn't happened yet. Like, do you have thoughts or feelings about JJ? Like, how's this going to go?
I honestly don't know. And we did have the discussion about like, should he have had to be an assistant first, or because there
leave,
were so
leave
few
that part of, leave the should part of it aside. Like, if he gets this job, like, what are your expectations?
I honestly don't know, because I would expect, I will say, based off how he talks on the Old Man and the Three and the podcast with LeBron and just hearing him commentate, if they're, and I know LeBron is LeBron. If their offense is not so much more inventive, I will be wildly disappointed. But I don't know if my expectation is that it will be more inventive, because we've kind of heard the like, oh, stuff is going to change but it always just kind of comes back to, like, no, LeBron is the end all be all there.
Right.
So I would be so interested to see what their offense looks like with him as their head coach. I also do, and this might be a like something encouraging for Lakers fans, I do feel like there will be some like personnel shifts if he's the guy you're bringing in as coach, just again, because of, it's wild that we're saying like his coaching philosophy. I'm going to cite this podcast that he recorded,
right.
But that's what we have to go off.
Right.
Just based off the way he talks about offenses, the Lakers are not built in the image of that, even like kind of.
I just, sorry to just come in and, you mentioned my Kings pessimism. I feel like I'm just it's like the downer of this podcast, but like, this seems so insanely risky and like, so it's like out of the box is cool, right? Like that's, it's awesome if you try to think a little differently in your coaching hires or anything you do with a team, but like I'm not saying anything groundbreaking, but it's like a guy that has never coached at all, that is not that far removed from his playing career, that certainly like has had the opportunity to sort of advertise himself, whether it's to players or the organization through media, and like comes off great. Like sometimes you get a Steve Kerr and sometimes you get like a Steve Nash. And I just have more of a feeling that Redick is going to skew closer to Nash, where it's just like he gets into the job and it's like, oh my God, this is just so different to deal with from this side of things. The personalities here are, just having LeBron is like, I mean, there's probably a discussion to be had of like, with the exception of very few guys, like having LeBron on your roster as a coach is like, it's at least a double-edged sword, and sometimes might be more of a bug than a feature, just because of the expectations that come with it, because of the sort of knowing looks everyone gives about like who's actually making decisions here. And just the idea of, if things go badly for the Lakers, it won't be LeBron that gets blame. It just will be Redick. And it's, you're always hired to be fired, but it's just, I'm not confident that, and it may not have anything to do with Redick really, but I'm just not confident that like, that's going to go well. It's like, what? I don't know.
I think I'm just curious.
I'm curious too.
I'm just curious. And the other thing though, he might be stepping into a good situation, because I don't know how much value I assign to what Rich Paul says about LeBron James, is because he's not going to say anything that would portray LeBron as even human, let alone in a bad light. But if he's talking about that the Lakers should make this decision more about Anthony Davis than LeBron, it almost gives JJ Redick some cover to where it's like, right, these next 1 to 2 years will be high pressure and maybe people will come at me, but is there job stability in knowing, well, it sounds like LeBron's either going to retire or just leave. And so I'll get to be part of more of the ground up process at that point, if they actually are basing this off the long term.
I mean, maybe. And I guess like, it's probably fair to mention that like, it's not like the Lakers are the only team that thought Redick might be a good head coach.
No,
like
Charlotte and Toronto have interviewed him too, right?
Yeah. I mean, his name keeps popping up, and he's had multiple interviews. I mean, like Joe Mazzulla wanted him on the staff this year, right? Like, remember that was a real thing that almost happened. So I guess maybe I should walk back like some of my general pessimism, but like, it's just such a fraught, like difficult spot to be in for someone with no experience.
Here's my thing though. What is the coach that you would feel better about going into this situation? Would it have been maybe Mike Budenholzer who's already off the
market. He's my answer to like any question like this. So it's like, I kind of know what I'm getting. He's been around the block. He's won a championship. Maybe he's not a great coach, but he's been really good in multiple places. I just feel comfortable with him. I have, I feel like we do this a lot where it's like, I'm just going to go with the one that I have the fewest questions about. Like we did that with the Bucks a couple of years ago. They were like our no notes team. Denver was our no notes team for a while. Budenholzer's kind of my no notes coach, or the closest thing to it of the guys that are actually have been recently available. It's just like, I feel safe in Mike Budenholzer's capable hands. I don't know about anybody else.
I'm so interested to see what Phoenix's defense looks like under him. But final thing, Trajan Langdon hired as the lead executive for the Detroit Pistons. I actually really like that hire. I thought I was covering the Nets when he was there. Like I was on site and they did a lot of good and creative things while he was part of the front office. And I think he, did well in New Orleans for the most part too. But there was the report that said he's not married to keeping Monty Williams. My first thought was, did Monty Williams leak this?
Yeah. That's a weird situation. I don't know how you smooth that over with Troy Weaver. Like, it's just
the smoothing was done. Like that's not even just, he's gone. Like he'll be in a consultant role.
Yeah, right. He'll be consultant, or he's going to be transitioning into an advisory role.
The Monty Williams thing is more interesting because he's 1 year into a 6-year contract.
I mean, maybe. So I guess you would have said like, well, does this mean we won't see long, expensive coaching contracts? But we led this off talking about Ty Lue getting 5 years.
Also, like Tom Gores was so integral to making this happen. It wasn't just he gave Troy Weaver the wheel and just let go.
Right. So. That's like that. So I know we've always implied that like Monty Williams got an offer, like said no, and Tom Gores was like, "What about this offer?" And then that was it. Is that like that's pretty well established that that's how it went down, right?
If it at worst it was like mutual, but it didn't come out that Troy Weaver preferred other candidates. I can't now remembering that, but
it might have been Charles Lee or something. Like I forget who the name was, but that's right.
But it still falls into, so if you're Tom Gores, it's if you think there's going to be upheaval in your front office, why would you make this decision to go all in for this coach, knowing that any lead basketball executive you hire is probably going to want a say in who is the coach, among other things.
Not to bring it back, like the Kings of the like when was this have been? Like I guess early 2010s kept doing shit in the wrong order, where it's like new GM, like old coach, new GM hires new coach classes with GM gets fired, new GM, new coach. Like, and it was just like, it went in this like messed up circle forever. It's like George Karl, now Mike Malone, now Tyrone Corbin. And it's like Pete D'Alessandro, Vlade Divac's the GM. Now it's like, what do we do? So like Detroit needs to be real. Like, I do think Trajan Langdon should probably get to hire a coach. I think like, I'm sure he wants to. And then hopefully that's where the cycle ends, and we just Monty Williams, like that's dead money, too bad Pistons, new coach, and then we're stable.
Is Monty Williams coaching the Pistons this time next year?
Ooh, no, right?
No.
No.
I mean
the money makes me hesitate, but like the answer has to be no, doesn't it? Like, what did he do? What happened this year that would make you say, well, hold on, like I think there's something going on here.
What did he say or do this year that makes you think he's happy?
Right. From the jump, I mean, we go back to like, it didn't seem like he wanted this job until the offer was such that like anyone would say yes. Like that's a bad starting point when you're almost like kidnapped with millions of dollars, like into a job. It's like forced to take this money. Damn it. Like take this. I don't want it. No. How about this much money? Okay. I'll take it. Like it's not a good jump off.
Oh, the other thing really quickly, this happened a while ago and it kind of flew under the radar. I think we obviously knew about it, but Memphis kind of turning over its assistant staff under Taylor Jenkins. I didn't really know how to read on it. It does sound like he might have been part of the decision-making process, because I don't look at anything they've done and think, well, Taylor Jenkins is on the hot seat. This feels more like a sign of maybe he wants more creative offensive minds in the building, and that there's a realization there are going to be heightened expectations next season when everyone's healthy and John Morant's not going to miss basically the whole season, but the first 25 games because of a suspension. But I found that to be interesting that it happened.
Surprising to me, just because my thought was, Well, two thoughts. One is that Jenkins is like super highly regarded and like therefore the staff is all great and you're not going to change anything. And two, like my whole take on the Grizzlies offseason is sort of like, do you just trust that the roster you built for last year that you liked so much would have been awesome had everyone not gotten hurt? And so let's just go full continuity. But so the changing out a bunch of assistants is like a weird curveball that I did not see coming.
I think it portends that they're not going to make many changes elsewhere, where it's we're just going to duck the tax and hope that we're better somehow. I think that's what it portends.
Trade Zaire Williams too, probably.
It's stat padding special edition to the one, the only, the legendary, may he rest in peace, Bill Walton, passed away after a long battle with cancer at the age of 71 this past week. Fuck cancer forever and ever and ever and ever until the end of time and back again. He was just great. I mean, this is not someone we knew personally, but the stories you hear coming out about him, what Kareem wrote about him. I saw Jeremy Wu of ESPN was talking about when he first met Bill Walton. And I think it was last year. He said, this was the story that stuck out the most to me was he was just introducing himself. And Bill Walton, he thought it was going to be a quick exchange. Bill Walton had him sit down and started picking his brain about basketball and that's just a cool story. He's also one of the guys or people, from the older generation that really just seemed to still enjoy basketball no matter what or who he was watching. And then there's just the level of eccentricity to his commentating and who he was. And he was it's very hard to say that you actually like someone from afar. You could like the way they play, like the things they say. He just seemed like this is the guy who me personally, I've never met, but if I could have dinner with him and just get I would just end up falling in love with him.
Yeah. Did you hear the Mike Breen story that he told? I forget. I think he might've told it to Malik Andrews on some ESPN spot, but it was just about like Mike Breen's father was very ill and was a veteran, and like basically Bill Walton treated him to like when he's close to death to like this incredible tour of the battleship that he served on in the war, and like it was the most moving experience of Mike Breen's dad's late life, and like Bill Walton just like was his best friend like basically from that point on, not Mike Breen but his dad. Just like an incredibly like it's always like you don't ever want to like really wax, poetic about someone you said we've never met, but like when every single report is about like this person's kindness or like good nature or sense of humor or curiosity, like basically just run down the list of qualities like we wish we all had in more abundance. Like it feels pretty safe to say like, man, we lost a good one, but like we also got so much from. I was also like only 71. Like that feels sucks. Like, he's been a fixture of the basketball appreciating public for like my whole life, like, and just like has been a staple and like throughout all that time, revered, loved, like enjoyed. So sucks to lose him. But like,
I grew up during the tail end of the NBA on NBC days, which might be returning. But no comment. And I just remember him being on those broadcasts and like, he was the recognizable voice and just like the one I enjoyed hearing. And this is like someone who didn't understand the game really at that point, but I have those memories ingrained into my head from him. And also I will say, I don't say this about many people of you. I say it all the time about, but like if I fall on the right side of what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar thinks, I feel pretty okay about my stance.
Right. And I think too, the last thing I would say is like, in our job and like being exposed to like what we read every day, what we listen to every day, and you alluded to this, but like it kind of feels like a lot of people whose job it is to watch, talk about, analyze the NBA, they kind of don't like it, or at least like approach it with like it's, I don't know, a critical bent or like are looking for things to pick at. And I do this all the time. But Bill Walton fucking enjoyed, like he loved it. And like, there was never even some of the funny quotes we have of him saying like, so-and-so is like an affront to Western civilization or whatever. It was always given with the spirit of like, you never doubted for a second that he was like having anything less than the time of his life, like watching and talking about basketball. And that is very different than the vibe we get from a lot of commentators on prominent networks and just people in the industry in general. So that was always like incredibly.
That's why I'll always go, this is not to compare him to Bill Walton, but people do not like Reggie Miller. I'll always go to bat for Reggie Miller because he has just shown a level of appreciation for this generation that not everyone from his generation has. And Bill Walton was that like times infinity, just like the energy that he brought there. And we were lucky to have Mike Hernish in because we get to celebrate the life and times of Bill Walton by getting to play. Who is Bill Walton talking about? Are you ready, Grant?
I'm so ready. I'm looking at some that I have and I'm just laughing to myself. But go ahead.
I have 8 for you.
Oh my God. Are we doing them all? I also have 8.
I think is this we could save, you want to do 4 and 4? It's a Bill. This is the only stat padding we have is Bill Walton.
Let's do 4 and 4 because I don't like the idea of this being the end of the Bill Walton bit. It feels like it would be nice to say we'll be back with more next time.
Okay. So I'll give you my 4 first.
Okay.
Who is Bill Walton talking about? Blank lost his mind. Life is but a series of choices. We wish blank the best. We love blank. We used to wake up and he'd be on our living room couch. A, Robert Parrish. B, Rick Carlisle. C, Will Bynum. D, Gilbert Arenas. E, Richard Jefferson.
Oh, Mike, why is Will Bynum in there? I'm going to say Richard Jefferson.
That is incorrect. It's Gilbert Arenas.
Oh, wow. He was on their couch?
Yeah. Great. I was just like, he must have known a very different Gilbert Arenas than we have, whose podcast is an affront to podcasting. But anyway, who is Bill Walton talking about? You're talking about one of the best defensive forwards in the history of the NBA. Blank and Tim Duncan is just making it look so easy. Sean Marion, Ron Artest, Andre Kirilenko, Robert Horry, or Scottie Pippen.
Great options. Robert Horry feels like the one that doesn't belong. I feel like he's always really liked Scottie Pippen. I'm going to say Scottie Pippen.
You should have went with Robert Horry because that's the right answer.
Damn it. Mike's always a step ahead of me.
Who is Bill Walton talking about? He's been plagued with short arms his whole career. Andre Miller, Smush Parker, Kevin Willis, Latrell Sprewell, or Bobby Jackson.
Okay. Kevin Willis did have notably short arms, so I'm going to say Kevin Willis and hope that Bill Walton was speaking factually.
That is correct.
All right.
Nice job.
Got one.
Who is Bill Walton talking about? Shades of Hakeem Olajuwon there. What an outlet pass by blank. Hakeem Olajuwon, Nikola Jokic, Corey Blunt, Todd McCullough, or Kelvin Cato.
You had me at Corey Blunt.
That's incorrect. It was Kelvin Cato.
That was my second.
I love that Hakeem Olajuwon was an option here because Bill Walton's the type of guy where he could be talking about Hakeem Olajuwon.
I wanted to pick everybody there. That's how I always feel.
That was your 4.
All right, here you go. Dan, who is Bill Walton talking about? It looked like they were moving forward when they bought out Sean Bradley's contract. They still have him, but now his name is blank. Jan Mahinmi, Eric Dampier, Desana Diop, Danny Fortson, Mamadou Jai.
Eric Dampier.
You're correct. 1 for 1. I think Mike just wanted to see if I could remember how to say Desana Diop and Mamadou. Is it Njai or Jai? I've never figured that one out. All right. Good job. 1 for 1. Number 2, blank makes everyone else in the league look like Michelle Tafoya. Is that a compliment? I don't know. Elton Brand, Emeka Okafor, Shaq, Alonzo Mourning, Larry Johnson.
Who was the first one?
Elton Brand.
I'm going to go Emeka Okafor.
It is, in fact, Shaquille O'Neal, which kind of makes sense.
He said a lot of stuff about Shaquille O'Neal. I feel like he's
one, and then 2, I think Michelle Tafoya is not very tall. And so when she is interviewing athletes, she looks even shorter. And so maybe that's another. We got a couple here that have been like factually accurate, which is a rare thing for a lot of these. Number 3, he's been working out in the off season on that incredible computer generated body he has. Kevin Garnett, Serge Ibaka, Tony Allen, Gerald Wallace, or your personal favorite, Wilson Chandler.
Ooh. whose body among that group looks most like it was generated by a computer? I'm going to say it's not Kevin Garnett. There was Tony Allen, Wilson Chandler. Who were the other two?
Gerald Wallace and Serge Ibaka.
I'm going to go with Serge Ibaka.
You would be wrong. It is Kevin Garnett.
What?
Mike and Bill Walton both tricked you, I think.
I was leaning too far into the factually accurate portion.
Yeah. You never know. It's because it pivots hard sometimes to the complete opposite. All right. Last one for now, but we will do more of these because I'm not ready to let it go. Number 4, blank used to be much better in every aspect of the game. I mean, weren't we all? Arvydas Sabonis, Patrick Ewing, Jamal Mashburn, Reggie Miller, Hakeem Olajuwon.
Patrick Ewing.
That's correct. You got 2. That's really
nice. 50% hit rate on Bill Walton quotes. I'll take it.
Oh God, I just read the next one.
Nope, you got to save it because I read the one after I stopped at yours and I wanted to give it to you.
The next one is I'll tease it for next time. The next one is better than any of the ones either of us has read today.
Oh man, now
people need to come back.
R.I.P. Bill Walton.
Yeah, shouts to Bill Walton. Shall we call it?
Yes, we should call it.
Everybody, thank you for listening, for watching. If you watched, seeing my sweaty head that I had to put a hat on.
Dude, what are you talking about? We went through this before we even started recording here.
I could see it right now. I have head sweat. It's all over.
We are in 1080p because I don't think StreamYard does 4K. You look fantastic. You look fantabulous.
You know what? Brandon. I was just fishing for a compliment and you fell for it.
It took you over 2 hours to get there, Dan. What the fuck?
I was playing the long game, just trying to get you to tell me that I look good by the end of the podcast. It's just thank you. Thank you for falling into my trap that I laid for an hour and 50 minutes. What else should we talk about? Thanks again for watching, for listening, for putting up with our inability to close out a podcast, which is mostly falling at my feet. If you have not done so already, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up so you don't miss anything, so you can continue to spread the word, so you can enjoy our ongoing Bill Walton bits for as long as we get content for that, because I would love to just never let that go. We'll see how that goes. What else? Join our Discord where, oh, by the way, if you want to submit guest of players, please do so by joining our Discord. If you'd like to continue the guest of player bit, it's hard for Dan and I to come up with those for ourselves. And so we very much do rely.
And we know it's the summer and I think people are kind of traveling. Yeah. So you can also our email, hardwoodknocks@gmail.com. That's all that stuff's in the link. And you could DM me on Twitter if you really want to. All the necessary points of contact are in the podcast and YouTube descriptions.
Yep. What Dan said. I think that's going to do it. Thanks again. RIP Bill Walton, one of the best. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.